Transposition from one clef to another is a really special case scenario. Transposition usually means to change the key of a passage of music by repeating the intervallic sequence of the passage beginning on a new note. There are two kinds of transposition, chromatic and diatonic. Diatonic transposition takes into account only the diatonic intervals of a melody, firsts, well, unisons, seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, and so on, whether they're major or minor. For instance, the following melody is composed of all diatonic seconds. But if you look closer, you can see that the melody is composed of major seconds and minor seconds, and that each of the three versions of the sequence sounds different. Let's take a little closer look at that. The first one, C, D, E, whole step, major second, major second. The second one, D, E, F, whole step, half step, major second, minor second. The third one, E, F, G, half step, whole step, minor second, major second. Diatonic transpositions certainly abound in music. Developmental sequences have a tendency to use diatonic transpositions. A real famous one is this one. First time, and then a second time. Sounds exactly the same. And again, the same. But if you look at the intervals, they're slightly different. Whole, whole, half. Whole, half, whole, and so on. So diatonic transpositions occur in developmental passages. You need to recognize them and go for them instantly. The more complicated version is the chromatic transposition, which is much more important in going from one instrument to another. Chromatic transposition takes into account not only the diatonic interval, the second, third, or fourth, but also the quality, the major or minorness of the intervals of a melody. The transposition of a three-note melody, major second, looks like this. And then up a second, and then up another second. All major seconds in this case. Notice that the arrangement of the intervals in the two new transpositions implies a new key. These first three notes, C, D, E, clearly outline the first three notes of a C major scale. They're in the key of C. If you go up a second and transpose all major seconds, you get an F sharp. This D, E, F sharp implies the key of D. If we go up another second, starting on E, whole step, F sharp, whole step, G sharp. This implies the key of E. So you can see a chromatic transposition is a little bit more complicated than a diatonic one because it implies all sorts of different tonalities. Now, transposing intervals so far has been a real proposition. We take some notes and put them in a different place, and then they sound different. Now, with instrumental transpositions, it doesn't work like that. It looks different and sounds the same. The reasons for these are sort of complicated, and they have to do with the historical creation and design of instruments, basically wind instruments. At some point, somebody decided that a trumpet should be this long, and a clarinet should be this long, or there should be a certain amount of air. It should be pitched a certain way. Having once decided that instrument design parameter, they discovered that it was easier for wind instruments to play in flat keys. So rather than have instrumentalists always having to play in a bunch of accidentals, they simply decided to change the, basically it's the clef really, um, to something that made it easier for wind players to finger certain keys. So, if that was confusingly explained, it gets worse. Um, there are basically three typical wind transpositions: B flat instruments, E flat instruments, and F instruments. And the F transposition really mostly applies only to the French horn, although the English horn and I think the alto flute also reads in F transposition. But basically, it works like this: if something's in the key of C, you write it for a B flat instrument up a step, which means in this case the key of D, always up a major second. The E flat instruments transpose up a major sixth. In other words, they read a major sixth higher and it sounds a major sixth lower. The French horn reads up a fifth and it sounds a fifth lower. We'll take a closer look at this. So with this first three-note melody, C, D, E, if you want it to sound like this, played by a B flat instrument, a clarinet, a trumpet, tenor saxophone. Actually, tenor saxophone reads up a second plus an octave. But if you want this to sound like this, you have to write it like this. It looks a whole step higher than it sounds. For the French horn, this looks like this. Remember, they're reading a fifth higher than it sounds. The alto saxophone looks like this. They read a major sixth higher. Now remember that these transpositions don't bother the instrumentalist. They already know how these notes relate to their fingering. But reading a score, that's something different. It can be seen that the principle of transposition has many practical applications, such as transferring readable parts from one instrument to another, or changing the key up or down to accommodate vocalist ranges, etc. But the recognition of transposition in the abstract context of musical composition, specifically the idea of development, melodic, thematic, or sequential transposition, is an even more important element in the process of acquiring an understanding of the inner workings of music.